for proper intergovernmental debate.
I hope that we have it. And by the way, we have censorship in America. Watch ABC, NBC, and CBS. I'm at the meetings. I'm at a discussion. I see and hear what happens. I watch, my wife has Channel 6 on, which drives me nuts at home, and it has nothing to do with the damn stuff that actually happened. And that's the truth. We have it already, and I pray to God we don't lose America. Mr. Chairman, indulgence, and I'll shut up. Mr. Price didn't get a chance.
Quickly. Yes, sir. You talked about putting pressure on, and I agree that Brussels is a cold house for free speech. But a lot of the regulation is actually happening in my own country, in Ireland, in Dublin, where a lot of the tech companies are headquartered, their European headquarters. And it's the Irish Media Commission, or Commission na Meán in the Irish language, which is the ground zero really for a lot of this regulation. And here's where I think the US can do a lot, because there's strong bilateral relationships between Ireland and the United States, is to put pressure on the Irish government to stop the bullying of tech companies. And already X is in the Irish Supreme Court soon against the Irish Media Commissioner. So they're already starting to crack down. So I would hope that you use your good offices here to put pressure on the Irish.
Mr. Chairman, I have a point of parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman is recognized.
Why is the witness leaving this hearing early, and certainly without?
He has an engagement he told us about. This is not unusual. It's happened before under Democrat leadership of the committee, under Republican leadership of the committee. We're trying to get through as many people as we can. You've had many of your witnesses who did not ask Mr. Farage a question. Many of your colleagues, if you could have coordinated with them, you didn't go in order. We didn't necessarily go in order because we wanted to get as many people up front asking Mr. Farage questions.
Could we ask him if he would be willing to stay for?
It's totally up to the witness, but if the witness has to go somewhere, I understand. We were glad that he came. We were glad that we had a chance to visit with him in Europe. So you could have went on that trip and had a chance to interact with Mr.
I wasn't
Farage.
invited, but next time.
No, you were definitely invited. Everyone was invited from the Democrat side. The whole committee was invited. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Georgia for questions. And Mr. Farage, if you can stay longer, we would definitely welcome that.
When I chaired this event in the Palace of Westminster, we had an hour for it because time was very tight, and that was perhaps the source of a slight disagreement Mr. Raskin and I had.
A little bit of confusion on that.
We would have given this.
Each side got an hour, but the whole thing was limited to an hour. And then your side went, and then you called it off.
I was given the instructions. This we've given 3 hours, and I apologize, but no, I can't stay longer.
Okay.
I could send the Constitution down to the White House for the president to read it.
The gentleman is not recognized. The gentlelady from Georgia has 5 minutes to ask her questions while Mr. Farage is still here, and then he will leave when he has to leave.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today. Our First Amendment rights, as you can see, are definitely under attack. Words are very powerful tools, as you've heard them being used here in this hearing, and this administration has gone out of their way to retaliate against our students, news agencies, and others who express views that don't align with their extreme agenda. By using lawsuits, eliminating funding, and even going so far as to send out a memo with a list of restricted words that can't even be used. The actions of this administration have been ruled against in court time and time again by judges from both parties on a basis of abusing our constitutional rights. From freezing funding for colleges because they do not bend to this administration's will, to removing programs that are designed to expand student understanding and access in education, which I'd like to add, increases future opportunities for our Republican constituents as well, and using federal investigation powers to retaliate. We are watching the First Amendment be manipulated in ways that this nation hoped that they would never see. Hear it from the judges who have ruled against government bullies who attempt to violate the rights of the American people. U.S. District Judge Suknanim found First Amendment violations in the government investigation into media matters, which she stated is likely to succeed in its claim that the FTC was using this investigation as a retaliation against the watchdog group for claims against a prominent Trump supporter. A clear violation of First Amendment protections, and the cases, they just go on and on and on. U.S. District Judge McFadden, a Trump appointee, ordered that the Associated Press's access to the White House press be reinstated, ruling that denying their access because of differing viewpoints was a clear violation of the First Amendment. If the majority wants to talk about attacks on the First Amendment in other parts of the world, They need to start right here in our administration. The Constitution is the foundation of this country. It is not meant to be trampled on for political or for business advantage. When you love something, you want to protect it, and you want to do what's best for it. You want to improve it. This means people will speak out and disagree on actions taken in their country and offer critiques of our leaders and, yes, the politicians. That's a constitutionally protected right. If the First Amendment is our guardrail, then this administration is truly trying to push us off the road. This government should be strong enough to accept any criticism without violating people's rights and offending the man in the White House. Professor Kay, I have a question, just one question for you. Based on what you've seen since this January, if our colleagues in the majority continue to pretend that our First Amendment rights are not under attack here at home, what could this mean for our country within the next 3 years?
Thank you for that question. I think that as we look at the current moment and the current situation for our media, for our universities, for people's access to information generally, particularly access to health information, I think it portends really very problematic and dark days ahead. Will we be able to have access to information that makes us informed parents or informed citizens, able to make voting decisions? I think that's the kind of future that we should expect if we don't recognize this situation. And I think that the tenor of the conversation could at least recognize that there are violations of fundamental rights to freedom of expression by this government right now. At least recognize it. I know that Democrats in the last 5 years called out the Biden administration from time to time when it did things that it thought was inconsistent with free speech values. I think having that kind of honest discussion and then some real constraint is where the committee should be heading.
Thank you so much. I encourage everyone that sees nothing wrong with this administration's retaliatory attacks on expressions of our First Amendment to consider just how much you are willing to give up to appease this man in the White House. At this time, I'd like to yield the remainder of my time to our ranking member.
There's no time left to yield. I think the gentlelady yields back. I do have to run to another commitment. I will be back in 20 minutes. We will have Mr. Knott take over as chair. Mr. Farage, if you have to leave, I look forward to visiting with you sometime later, hopefully.
I do, but thank you very much.
Thank you for your testimony.
Could I just ask you to stay for one more, Mr. Farage?
The gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Farage, I enjoyed Milwaukee at the Harley-Davidson plant with you. That was a great evening. So, question for Mr. Price or Mr. Farage. One requirement for speech to be censored as a false communication offense under the OSA is that speech must cause non-trivial psychological or physical harm. What is non-trivial psychological harm?
I honestly don't know. And that's the problem with this legislation. It's so open-ended, it could mean anything. It leaves this entirely in the hands of local police forces to make their decisions. And the other disturbing element of this is that much within this act can be changed on a whim by a government minister, or at the other end, it can be interpreted by Ofcom in ways that it sees fit. You know, this is not good legislation. It's totally open-ended. It could literally mean whatever you want it to mean.
And local law enforcement, I guess, can make that decision on who they decide to prosecute and who they do not. Have we seen it tending one way or the other? I know we've talked about a couple of cases in here. Are there certain people being targeted, you think, with OSA?
Well, that's the fear, isn't it? The fear is that certain communities will be acted upon more harshly than other communities. That creates the impression of a two-tier country. That then breaks down trust in law and order, the democratic system, and everything else. I thought what was interesting overnight was that the boss, Sir Mark Rowley, the boss of the Metropolitan Police, has said, look, we arrested this guy at Heathrow because we had to under the law, but they've thrown it back to the government to say, come on, can you just define more clearly what you want this legislation to mean? And that's why I think it's rotten legislation. It impacts us in ways that we can't yet foresee. It impacts potentially Americans and American businesses, and it needs to be gotten rid of, and we need to start again.
So, Mr. Price, talking about affecting American businesses, I guess Europe's 440 million people, the U.S. is 300 million people. How do these companies, what do you see down the road for these platforms, these social media platforms, these companies that feel like they have to try and comply if they're going to do business in Europe? If, in fact, we don't repeal this OSA thing, which I hope Mr. Farage is able to do that with his leadership at some point in the near future. So how does this play out for our companies, Mr. Price, and for free speech in Europe in general?
Well, on the corporate side, they're facing a really complicated piece of legislation, and as Mr. Farage outlined, with the provisions that are confusing in the Online Safety Act in the United Kingdom, there are similarly extremely confusing provisions in the Digital Services Act. So the mindset has to be one normally of compliance. One company has stood up to this whole regime and is challenging it at every level, and that's X. I hope others join and do the same, because the European Commission, though, really has been quite threatening. You'll recall the Thierry Breton letter, of course, about the Elon Musk's interview with then candidate President Trump. And you'll also see that other members of the Commission have made threatening remarks against companies as well on these so-called voluntary codes of conduct. When X and Google left one of the codes of conduct, a European commissioner said, well, of course they are voluntary, but we note that you've left them and we'll still hold you on the obligations. And you have Thierry Breton saying as well, you can run, but you can't hide if you leave the codes of conduct. So the whole thing is designed to force compliance. And the hammer that they have, of course, is these enormous crippling fines.
It's like 10% on global revenue, if I understand correctly. So for some of these companies, that's a pretty tremendous fine.
Absolutely, yeah, of turnover.
And I guess, could you, as we're looking through this, it's like almost like people could claim that they were offended or hurt. You hurt their feelings, and then all of a sudden you're a target of this investigation. Is that right, Mr. Farage? Is that kind of?
Yes, and frankly, under free speech, we should be allowed to cause offence.
And that
I
happens
should be able
quite
to
often,
offend
right?
you should be able to offend me, and provided we know what the limits are, and the limits I think we fully understand of incitement, for example, then we have to get back to, a much freer way of living. And if people say rude things and we don't like them, well, we just ignore them and get on
Like
with our
today when
lives.
you were accused of Russian collusion, I guess. That was pretty offensive.
Well, I remember the Russia hoax very, very well. We had shades of it earlier on this morning, but,
That's what I was thinking.
but not much more than that, I'm pleased to say.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll yield back.
Thank you. And we're going to have to go, Mr. Chairman, but thank you very much.
Mr.
indeed.
Farage, you can blame it on me. One more. Oh, you're avoiding me.
Mr. Farage, thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Goldman.
I'm sorry to see you leave, Mr. Farage. I actually had much that we agree upon and was looking forward to your testimony, because it's very nice and refreshing to hear from my GOP colleagues that they are worried about authoritarianism. Mr. Biggs and Mr. McClintock both said that earlier. And I imagine, given what's going on in this country, when the president is sending the military into American cities, is weaponizing the Department of Justice to investigate his enemies, requiring loyalty oaths from all federal workers at risk of otherwise being fired, the list goes on and on. It is reassuring to hear that the Republicans, who have remained stone silent about Trump's authoritarian takeover of our government here, are actually concerned about authoritarianism. And I found it really heartening that Mr. Van Drew said, and I quote, "If we lose our First Amendment rights, we lose everything." Now, in his opening statement, Mr. Farage said, quote, "When the government starts regulating speech, it is rarely those that agree with the government who find themselves in court." And Mr. Farage, I'll ask you the question, is that similar to your concern about suppressing speech that disagrees with the government? Oh, Mr. Farage has left. Well, Mr. Raskin, I will then maybe just you can stand in for Mr. Farage for a minute here. I know you are a champion of free speech. I'm not sure it's the same free speech that Mr. Farage is supporting. But if there's concern about the government regulating speech is because it is rarely those that agree with the government who find themselves in court, then you would think that Mr. Farage and all of our Republican colleagues would be very, very concerned if a administration here in the United States was investigating criminally individuals who made the colossal mistake of speaking out against the president. That would be a clear violation of Mr. Farage's principle. Is that right?
He was talking about the importance of political dissent. And this is a test, Mr. Goldman, I think, of our constitutional patriotism. To what extent are we willing to speak up for people who are the targets of government repression, even if we don't agree with what they're saying? A great example of that is our colleague, Congresswoman MacGyver from New Jersey. I would hope that in a comparable circumstance, I would stand up for a Republican colleague who tries to exercise his or her oversight rights by going to a government facility on a prearranged visit and then gets caught up in the chaos and confusion outside, and they want to send her to jail for 30 years. I did stand up for our colleague from New York, I'm spacing his name.
Mr. Santos.
Mr. Santos, because they wanted to expel him without his having a conviction or an ethics process. And I said that wasn't fair. So I think I passed a micro test there. I would hope some of our colleagues would say, no, don't prosecute our colleagues just for doing their jobs.
Well, let's talk about that, because that is exactly what this Department of Justice is doing. Recently, we heard publicly, which would ordinarily never happen, the Department of Justice does not say publicly, they don't confirm that there are any investigations of anyone until there's an indictment, because that person or those individuals can't defend themselves. But now we know that Senator Adam Schiff, who led the first impeachment of Donald Trump, is under investigation by the Department of Justice. New York State Attorney General Letitia James, who filed a lawsuit against Donald Trump and his business, she is now under investigation. Miles Taylor, who literally did the only thing that he did was write an op-ed and a book criticizing the President of the United States, he is under criminal investigation. Chris Krebs, whose offense, I think, was to say that the 2020 election was the most secure ever, he is under investigation. John Bolton, who has criticized the president, gets his house raided. Lisa Cook, the Fed governor, is now under investigation for mortgage fraud, I guess because she doesn't want to lower rates. The degree to which this government is suppressing speech that simply opposes the president's views should make Mr. Farage and every single one of my Republican colleagues speak out in favor of the First Amendment, and yet we have heard nothing. There is still time, my friends, and I yield back.
Thank you, sir. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming.
Benjamin Franklin said over 270 years ago, freedom of speech is a principal pillar of a free government. When this support is taken away, the constitution of a free society is dissolved and tyranny is erected on its ruins. An evil magistrate entrusted with power to punish for words would be armed with a weapon the most destructive and terrible. Under pretense of pruning off the exuberant branches, he would be apt to destroy the tree. Mr. Farage talked in his opening statement that noted that Europe's regulatory regime risks exporting restrictive standards that could violate Americans' constitutional rights. So I'd like to expose that and discuss that a little bit further. He noted that the oh-so-benignly titled Online Safety Act exemplified this regulatory model. The OSA is marketed as a measure to protect children online, but it is clearly being used as a means to actually impose government-backed censorship, especially speech which is critical of government policy. As an egregious example, we have learned that the OSA has been used against Katie Lamb, MP for Weald of Kent, to block videos of her speeches made in Parliament critical of the fallout from the country's immigration policies. Mr. Price, are you familiar with the circumstance where actual speeches in Parliament or other public figures, their speeches are being censored by the government under this claim of protecting minors or protecting people from hearing this speech?
I'm familiar with censorship of public protests. That's already happened in the United Kingdom. The Online Safety Act has placed blocks on those to protect children. That's the claim, but it has prevented adults from accessing it as well.
So the Times has also reported that using the Communications Act of 2003 and the Malicious Communications Act of 1988, there have been 37 police forces have made over 12,000 arrests in 2023 alone, which is the equivalent of 33 a day, all in relation to social media posts. Are you familiar with that information, Mr. Price?
I am, yes.
Okay. In July, the House of Commons Science, Innovation, and Technology Committee released a report indicating that the OSA was merely a first step, is the way that they have described this. In other words, they are planning to do even more to address what they describe as online harm. Have you heard that as well?
I have, yes.
Well, and I think that there's something that just happened this week, and a few of the members have referenced it, but it involved the Irish comedian and writer Graham Linehan, who was arrested in Britain, apparently for social media posts about transgender issues. Did you hear of this circumstance?
Yes, I did. I know Graham personally.
Okay, and according to his Substack article, the trouble actually began when he was in America. He was at the airport in Arizona seeking to fly back to Europe. Was told that he did not have a seat, was put on a later flight, and when he arrived at Heathrow, he was met by 5 armed police officers. Are police officers in England typically armed?
They're not, no.
So did you find it strange that he would be met by 5 armed police officers?
At airports, counterterrorism police are usually armed, and or there's a special wing of the Metropolitan Police that has armed support unit.
So is he considered a terrorist?
I'm not clear what provision he was arrested under of legislation, but there is a power in the Terrorism Act to arrest people at airports and seize their devices.
Sure. Was he identified as a terrorist because of his online posts?
It's not clear yet if he was arrested under that provision, but it has very wide-ranging powers, and it is used on occasion to detain people at ports.
Okay, I understand that, and that probably is more of a frightening answer than I expected, which is that they've used the power that is typically reserved for terrorists or people who are of grave risk to the country to arrest Mr. Linehan at the airport because of his Twitter posts. Is that right?
It's not clear if they use it yet, but that is a power that they frequently, that is used to seize people's devices at airports.
Can you describe more of what happened with this incident involving Mr. Linehan? Do you have the familiarity with the facts?
I've read his statement, yes.
Okay, and could you please explain what happened?
It appears that he was detained on arrival in Heathrow and then arrested, searched, subjected to a long series of questions, most of which revolved around his beliefs on gender ideology and transgender issues. Some of the questions from the police, according to Mr. Linehan, were extremely ideological in nature, and they talked about people who are assigned a gender at birth, which, as he pointed out himself, is activist language that the police should not be using.
So he also claims that his bail conditions one of the conditions was that he could no longer use X. Is this a tactic you have seen or heard of being used before?
Yes, we've seen extraordinary bail conditions, even placed on clients of our own. We had a client, Pastor Dia Moodley, who was given a bail condition that he was not allowed to preach about the differences between Christianity and Islam on the basis of that he would be bailed. So we have seen bizarre and wide-ranging bail conditions set on people before under speech offences.
Time's expired.
Okay, thank you.
The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from North Carolina.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the witnesses for your testimony and for your patience. It's been a long hearing. I think it's very timely that we're discussing threats to freedom of speech and innovation in this committee. I do wish we were talking about what's going on in this country right now, but I don't always get what I wish for. Freedom of speech in this country is under threat. There is no question about it. And and we haven't talked about this much, so I'm going to focus on it. The essential American ideal of innovation is also under threat, and it's enshrined in our Constitution, and it's being ignored. The gravest threats to speech and innovation are coming not from our democratic European allies, but from the authoritarian and unconstitutional actions of the Trump administration. The Trump administration has embarked on a coordinated crackdown of speech on universities across the country. I represent more than 5 universities in the Research Triangle area. I've seen it. The administration illegally froze billions of dollars in federal research grants, affecting not just people's health and safety, which is what they were for in the first place, but the economies of places like North Carolina. They forced the resignation of university presidents they don't like, and they threatened to strip universities of patents for discoveries made in their labs. Unprecedented. This administration has also refused to restore these important grants, which fund research for everything from breast cancer to infant mortality, unless the schools allow the government to exert control over faculty hiring, academic programs, and student admissions. Professor Kaye, how have the Trump administration's attacks on our nation's preeminent research universities harmed the ability to innovate?
I think that's an excellent question. and we've seen it across the board, these attacks on universities. And if we think about universities, and there is a connection here to freedom of speech, if we think of our universities as the principal engine for the generation of knowledge and the generation of ideas, basically innovation in our country, the administration is going after them in all the ways that you described. And it goes after them not only by withholding grants that have already been awarded, it's also going after them in the context of seeking to shape what the research is, what's actually being taught in the classroom. Those are, I think, very significant interferences with the potential for innovation in our country.
Well, thank you for that. And now to get to the tech issues, because that's kind of underlying what's going on. This hearing is supposed to be about Europe's threat to big tech companies, but I'd like you to speak about the threat of big tech companies and the AI models that they're creating on intellectual property rights, many of which are protected more strongly in Europe than they are here. How have AI models that scrape everything that they can, whether copyrighted or not, impacted innovation and even our newspapers, which are having to sue for the copyright for the content that they create?
Well, I think this is as you know, a pretty complicated area. But I would highlight, just to bring it to European regulation for a moment, whereas the United States has not really gone very far down the path of legislating in this area and finding ways to boost AI's potential for democratic and freedom of expression purposes, Europe has actually adopted an AI Act, which, again, we might not agree with all of its particulars, but it's aiming to harness the power of AI for democratic purposes and to ensure that AI doesn't have this negative impact on fundamental rights. I think that's an approach that we can learn from, actually, and that we haven't so far.
And I want to just, because I know I only have a second left, I really want to give a lot of credit to Congressman Issa, because he has been having excellent hearings on this very issue, but unfortunately, the larger Judiciary Committee has taken no action. And so I would encourage the larger Judiciary Committee to follow Congressman Issa's lead about protecting our creators. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Ross. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here to talk about ongoing concerns with European censorship, British censorship, and its effect on American speech or broader free speech principles that hurt certainly citizens, but American companies, both domestically and abroad. What I'm hearing today, at least from the witnesses, is rather alarming. This Orwellian in nature approach that Europe has taken, the hostility to free speech, to satire, to maybe speech that you disagree with. And I want to talk about that as it pertains to the UK, the EU, and certainly the US. Mr. Price, Prime Minister Starmer said that the UK does not have a free speech problem. Do you agree with that statement?
No, I do not.
In what ways do you disagree with the Prime Minister?
We have seen numerous prosecutions in the United Kingdom for totally non-violent speech. We have clients my own organization is acting for who have been arrested for silently praying, for offering consensual conversations, for preaching about the gospel. And I can go on. There are numerous and numerous examples.
12,183 prosecutions, I think, is at least what I've read. Does that sound about accurate to you?
That sounds accurate.
Which is a 50% increase from pre-pandemic levels. What does that tell you about maybe the focus of the British government as it pertains to speech right now?
Sadly, it shows that the United Kingdom, just like the rest of Europe, has entered a spiral of censorship, and it's getting worse. And it's gotten to the point where even our oldest and closest ally, the United States, has had to intervene and point that out. And as I said on numerous occasions, I'm extremely grateful to all of you for doing that. But the problem, frankly, is being now compounded and set in stone by things like the DSA from the European Union and the Online Safety Act in the United Kingdom.
Well, let's talk about the Online Safety Act for a second. I mean, I think it maybe is intended to protect children, and I think everyone lauds that. Mr. Farage talked about that nobody, right or left, wants their child exposed to bad content online. But it's been talked about, and you've seen this in your practice, used as a weapon to target speech that maybe the government finds uncomfortable or disagrees with. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We've seen, for example, Section 62, which is designed to protect children, being used to censor videos of protests near asylum centres. And so once you reach a point where content is restricted on the basis that it is political, we're moving well out of any kind of zone of protecting children into essentially censorship.
Right. So at least in the case of the comedian, the Irish comedian that was recently arrested, you know, I was not aware of his content before and looked at it, and it seemed to be satirical in nature or maybe hyperbolic and not necessarily to be treated literally. Is that your interpretation of that too?
Yes. In fact, I told Graham Linehan when I was growing up I wasn't allowed to watch his comedy on TV. Father Ted was the show that he's probably most famous for. So what I would say is he's an excellent satirist, and he's in the long tradition of Irish satire, starting with Jonathan Swift, really, and all the way up to today.
Isn't that part of like British society, though? Is like satire is embedded in the culture. Like you've embraced this for hundreds of years, right?
Yeah, I would just add Irish and British.
Irish and British, excuse me.
Yes, yeah, very much so. Yeah, and it's the concept. Really, I think we haven't seen political extremism in the British Isles in the way that we did in Europe, because we have a healthy way of kind of laughing at and poking fun at our leadership. And I think whether it's cartoons about the king in the 1800s all the way up to Father Ted and Graham Linehan's work today, that's a great tradition.
Isn't there growing frustration with the Irish people, the British people, maybe broader European cultures, that the government is more focused on speech than it is, say, the migrant crimes that are happening right under their noses? I mean, that seems to be, from my view across the pond, that particularly the British people, they're fed up with the non-enforcement of immigration laws at the expense, or maybe because, in large part, they're focused on what people are saying online. Do you share that?
I completely agree with that, and this is the discussion I had with Representative Raskin in London. This is about shutting down growing discontent in Europe with the decisions that our political elites have made. And we've reached a crisis point where it's no longer possible to conceal the level of public anger. And I think these censorship maneuvers are an act of desperation, and they won't work.
Thank you for that. And radically shifting to Mr. Reed for a second, in a different approach. In the app industry, does the DMA incentivize Chinese copycat companies to flood the market? And if so, how does that impact American companies in European markets? And what are the associated data privacy implications of that?
You may finish.
Being aware of the time, yes. The problem is Article 6, Section 4.
You have unlimited time. Pay no attention to the chairman.
I always pay attention to the chair and the ranking member. The easy idea is Article 6, Section 4, Article 6, Section 7, and even 10. Part of the problem is they basically have must-carry provisions. And what that does is open the door. Part of what small businesses have benefited the most from the existence of these platforms, again, as I said, this isn't a love affair, it's a business relationship. They opened the door to customers, and the customers trust what they're buying on the platform. Article 6, Section 4, and Section 7 really say they must put on anyone's product. And of course, the most classic example of that, the first mover under the new DMA was Pornhub, which Apple had decided they didn't want porn apps on their app store. And the first one out of the gate to say incorrectly, they claimed it was an Apple-approved app, which once again leads to confusion and breaks down trust. That was out of the gate the first app. And so from my members' perspective, their concern is, hey, I want to be sold at the store that people feel comfortable buying at. And the more you degrade the quality of experience and the more you degrade or allow that to be broader, we run into a problem. Thank you. I'm sorry for the time.
Mr. Chairman, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Apparently, the whereabouts of our missing witness have been ascertained. He's appearing on GB News, which I guess is the network he works for outside of the Rayburn building. I just wonder if it would be consistent with the rules and the practice of our committee for us to send someone to invite him to come back, because I think we have 5 or 6 members who haven't questioned yet. Would that be all right if we sent someone to go alert him that there's still members waiting to do their questioning, just out of courtesy and respect for our colleagues?
Well, the chair will make note that the witness has appeared voluntarily, he has left voluntarily, but in terms of going and asking him to come back, no objection there.
Okay, if we could do it, if we could find him, and I'd like to submit for the record this clip from GB News. British free speech under threat. Nigel Farage says UK is an authoritarian state like North Korea.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Gentleman yield? Yes, sir. The chair recognizes the representative from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, I spent my August traveling around my state listening to Vermonters tell me what was on their minds, and there was one constant thread, and that was fear and concern for young people, for their safety, for their future. And parents kept asking me, will my kids ever be able to afford a house in this economy? Is it going to be safe for my kid to go to school? And are my kids safe online? Over and over again. And I want to tell you about one conversation I had with a high school student in Vermont who said to me, we all know that social media on our phones is hurting us. And in some instances, it's literally killing us. And what he wanted to say is, what are you doing about it? What are you doing about it? And I have to ask myself the same question, because I'm a parent, I'm a former teacher, I'm now a member of Congress, and what are we actually doing to solve the problem, to stand up for our kids? And it's clear we need real attention on this. We need to focus our attention, and we do need to regulate corporations behind these problems. And we need real public oversight, yes, over the gun makers, yes, over financial speculators, but also big tech. Because polls show across the country, Americans overwhelmingly want us to take action on the harms that are hurting their kids. And yet here we are, first hearing back. We're not talking about the AI platforms that are leading kids to self-harm. We're not talking about the algorithms profiting off of teens' eating disorders. We're not working together to hold big tech accountable. No, we're here talking about how other countries are being too mean to big tech. It's gross. Professor Kay, thanks for being here. Can you briefly describe how the EU's Digital Services Act regulates social media content for children?
So the DSA is a very big piece of legislation, a big regulation, but it gets to exactly the point that you're making, which is The DSA is the result of a years-long process of democratically Europe trying to figure out what's the response to the massive power of big tech over their information environments. And so, to give one example, they provide a mechanism that actually requires those companies that are considered the very largest platforms and search engines to do an assessment of the risk that they cause in the context of illegal content, which could include child sexual abuse material. That is really only doing that basic risk assessment that we should imagine all companies would do.
Exactly.
And then based on that, they're actually obligated to take mitigating measures against them. So that's one example.
Yeah, I mean, this is bare minimum stuff here, right? Bare minimum.
Yep.
Risk assessment. What are we subjecting our children to?
Correct.
And so in your assessment, does the EU prioritize protecting kids and teens from content related to suicide and self-harm?
So the DSA is not content specific, right? It doesn't require any company, for example, to take down any particular kind of content. But in the risk assessment provision, it's pretty clear, and if you read the negotiating history around the DSA as well, it's pretty clear that this is one of the key issues that concerns Europeans and thus concerned the regulation as it was adopted.
Thank you. I really appreciate you being here to balance this out. So look, we got to follow the money here, okay? I want to draw your attention here to the visual here, okay? Trump inauguration fund, Amazon, $1 million, Meta, $1 million, Google, $1 million, Microsoft, $1 million, Apple, $1 million, OpenAI, $1 million, and the list goes on. This hearing is not about making the internet a safer place for kids. It's about harassing Europeans who are trying to do something. No, it's imperfect, but they're trying something, and we sit here twiddling our thumbs. There has never been a more important time than now to create some basic rules for big tech. Our kids are more important than these billionaires and their shareholders, period. If we truly want to protect our kids, we have to push back on unrestrained corporate power and try to retain some moral clarity in this moment.
Jill?
I was told I would have more time because there was a member that went over by a minute.
Sure, go right ahead.
We should be looking at any country around the globe who is actually trying to do something. And no, should we copy exactly what they're doing? No, but we shouldn't stick our heads in the sand and say that, oh, there's nothing we can do here. We cannot maintain the status quo and then go back to our constituents and look these parents in the eye and say that we're actually doing our jobs. The solutions are right in front of us if we would actually do the work here in this committee. And I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. I would just remind the gentlelady that Mr. Zuckerberg from Meta sent this committee a letter a year ago, August of last year, saying that the Biden administration pressured them to censor. They did it. They're sorry. They're not going to do it again, and they've changed policy. I said that in my opening statement. So we do think this committee's had a huge impact on protecting free speech. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we are examining a growing threat, the way that Europe and the UK are using so-called digital safety and competition laws to undermine American values and American innovation. The EU Digital Services Act and the UK's Online Safety Act go far beyond legitimate regulation. They empower foreign bureaucrats to label political dissent, even ordinary phrases like "take back our country," as hate speech. And they pressure US platforms to apply those censorship rules globally. At the same time, the EU's Digital Markets Act and the UK's DMCC deliberately single out American technology companies for punitive treatment, forcing them to share proprietary data and subsidize less innovative rivals. These laws are protectionist by design, and they put American jobs, innovation, and free speech at risk. Congress has a duty to push back. We must ensure that foreign governments cannot dictate what Americans are allowed to say online, nor use regulatory schemes and backdoor taxes on our most successful industries. I look forward to hearing from you all today and appreciate your testimony. Mr. Price, I am a former American judge, and as such, I know that laws must have clear, defined terms in order to be applied impartially and fairly and consistently. I'd like to return to the discussion of the OSA and specifically the requirement under which that for speech to be censored as a false communication, it must cause, quote, non-trivial psychological or physical harm. Would you share with us your perspective on the use of phrases such as non-trivial psychological harm and your view of whether it is possible for these terms to be applied uniformly, fairly, and consistently?
Good question.
I'm afraid I really can't, and you've hit the nail on the head really in terms of your question. These terms are extremely vague, and it's a long-standing principle of the common law that vagueness in the criminal law is repugnant.
And so, sir, is it your view that this is actually an appropriate or even enforceable regulatory scheme?
It's not appropriate, but they certainly intend to enforce it.
Mr. Reed, I'd like to turn back to the DMA's application to our companies and the concept of gatekeepers, which we touched on earlier today. Would you please describe how that operates and how these regulations are creating an unfair competitive advantage for European and Chinese firms at the expense of American companies?
Well, I think the primary problem with the way that the EU has set up the gatekeeper requirements is it's driving the largest companies to essentially pull back on the tools they build for my members from the frameworks that they build for the small businesses. Ironically, oftentimes these small guys are the ones who are going to compete with them because it allows them to say, well, in order to comply with the DMA, we need to remove various functions. And this isn't hypothetical. What we've seen so far in our discussions is they want to remove link-throughs. They want to remove other elements that they see as essentially keeping power in a few of the big companies. The irony is, of course, the small guy, not the medium-sized guy, not the billionaire, but the truly small guys actually need that foothold to step up. And so what it creates is an environment where, sure, there'll be some billionaire companies that will do well out of the DMA, but the thousandaires, those of us who are trying to get to that next level, are the ones who get crushed between the two giants.
Thank you. I yield the balance of my time to the chairman.
Hi, thank you. Mr. Price, I just want to make sure I understand exactly what's happening. A pastor gets arrested for what he said, but the guys who attacked him don't. Lucy Conley said things that she shouldn't have, probably. Not probably, definitely. I mean, what would Mr. Frost say? Intemperate, statements, but she took him down. She got more prison time than young violent offenders got. And Miss Rose Doherty, I believe, was praying silently outside, and she got charged. Is that all accurate?
The only point I would add is Rose Doherty, 74-year-old grandmother, was arrested for holding a sign that said, "Here to talk only if you want."
Oh, so she's praying silent, not saying anything, just a sign, right?
Just a sign, sir.
Oh, wow,
Yes,
wow. And if an American comments on this in a way that the DSA defines as disinformation, misinformation, hate speech, they can have their speech taken down as well. Is that accurate?
That is entirely accurate within the terms of the DSA.
That's the state of play. Mr. Reed, I would just point out, when Ms. Verkunen, the lady who took Mr. Breton's place, when she was here talking about how the Digital Markets Act can impact companies, she said, we don't have anyone in Europe complaining about the law. And my response was, that's because you don't have any companies. The way you define it, according to Mr. Price, and you understand, it only includes American companies and one Chinese company. Is that right?
Well, the irony is there are a lot of smaller European companies that are complaining about the DMA. Not the idea that they need a competitive landscape, it's that it focuses on entirely the wrong thing. You hit it on the head. A lot of our members come here to get money to go back there to build products.
Yep. I'm sorry, they called votes. I do want to move quickly, and I shouldn't have went over. Mr. Garcia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here today for two reasons. One, because Republicans are in the pocket of big tech, and two, they want to distract us on their war on free speech and expression in the U.S. We all remember Trump's inauguration. The tech oligarchs were all there. Musk, Zuckerberg, Bezos, Cook, Pichet, and they look like they won the presidency because they did. And they got what they paid for. Since taking office, Trump put out an AI action plan that could have been written by big tech, dropped enforcement provisions against tech companies, and tried to unlawfully fire 2 FTC commissioners who fought to hold these companies accountable. By the way, one successfully got back to work today, first day back. That's Rebecca Slaughter. Trump and his loyalists in Congress are also serving their corporate overlords by attacking the countries that actually try to rein in big tech. That's not innovation, that's corruption and oligarchy. The American people do not want corruption and oligarchy. They want leaders who have the backbone to stand up to big tech, to stop massive surveillance and protect data privacy and uphold freedom of speech. But the people least qualified to talk about freedom of expression are the ones that currently are cracking down on the First Amendment. As my colleagues have described, Trump and his fellow Republicans have banned words that the federal government can use. They've extorted media companies to punish news coverage they don't like, and they've weaponized the immigration system against people who have other views. They've suppressed economic data and other information that contradicts the propaganda machine and targeted medical research even and museum exhibits, all because they're afraid of words, history, and the truth. At the same time, Republicans are leading a historic crackdown on expression, and they're holding propaganda hearings like this and telling us to reject the evidence of our eyes and ears. Mr. K, thank you for being here today. As I mentioned, this administration is using the immigration system to suppress speech, as we've seen Mahmoud Khalil, Mohsen Madawi, Mario Guevara, and many others being targeted and detained because of their speech, and in Guevara's case, his reporting. Could you please comment on the ongoing weaponization of immigration to trample freedom of expression?
Yes, each of those examples are accurate. And I think that as we've heard so many different examples of crackdowns or alleged crackdowns on different kinds of speech in the UK or in Europe or in the United States, we just have to be honest that there are crackdowns happening in the United States. It's not it's entirely accurate to say these kinds of content-based restrictions and punishments in the US are very serious interferences with freedom of expression, and it would just be important to acknowledge that as we're talking about other kinds of restrictions as well.
Thank you for that. It's really important that we not allow arsonists to pretend that they're firefighters, and we must not let Republican lies prevail. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We will do one more, then unfortunately we have to recess for votes. And I know you guys have been sitting there for 3 hours. You need a well-deserved restroom break. We'll see. We got some refreshments for you back there, hopefully. Mr. Harris is recognized, and we'll take a quick recess.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this important issue, and to all of you that have shared on this panel today. Greatly appreciate your patience, excuse me, and your thoughtful answers. I've served as a pastor for 36 years, and so obviously I have a heightened sensitivity to the whole issue of when governments and institutions begin to talk about hate speech and the censorship of hate speech. And I guess one of the questions that I'm concerned about today, and I'll ask you, Mr. Price, because of your experience in this area, particularly with ADF, would you consider posting a Bible verse hate speech?
No.
And is saying there are only 2 genders hate speech?
I certainly wouldn't consider that hate speech.
And so, yet the UK's Online Safety Act, among other things, is requiring companies to take actions against content which, quote, incites hatred against people. And I guess my question is, again, Mr. Price, who is in charge of determining what constitutes content which incites hatred against people?
The regulator of the Online Safety Act is Ofcom, which is the statutory body, and the legislation itself includes what they call priority content. That's content that would be age restricted, encompasses things that are illegal outside or in real life, not online. The problem with that is that our pastor, Dia Moodley, that I mentioned earlier, he was threatened. He was arrested under the Public Order Act, which talks about stirring up religious hatred for comparing Islam and Christianity. And so on the basis that the Online Safety Act restricts something that's deemed to be a crime outside, that kind of content would be restricted. And I think that's extraordinary overreach.
And is hate speech, quote, objective?
Well, this is where I might just pick up on something Professor Kane said earlier in relation to hate speech. The problem with it is it's a tautology saying that incitement to hatred is speech that creates hatred. There have been attempts by the UN, like the Rabat Plan of Action, to try and, on the prosecution side, set out a more clear framework on it. But as far as European courts are concerned, I think that their jurisprudence in this area is essentially incoherent.
Right. Well, obviously, I oppose any hateful rhetoric that's expressed online, but at the end of the day, it's not the job of governments to police bad speech, especially when we'll never be able to agree on what actually constitutes bad speech. And at the end of the day, the best remedy for bad speech is good speech, not censorship, in my opinion. But I will also ask, there is currently a clash between social media platforms that value free speech and the laws of the UK, causing some companies to alter their terms of service. And Mr. Price, are American social media companies expected to comply with UK's Online Safety Act?
Yes, sir, they are.
And how does this impact the way in which companies set their terms of service?
We've seen this again and again when it comes to regulations from European regulators, either from Brussels or London, where companies, of course, commercial enterprises, setting and designing a system that complies with EU law often means setting something for their entire operations globally. And that we saw that again and again with GDPR. Every time you have to click, I don't want cookies, something, and Americans are exposed to this. That's as a result of, it's a complicated enough process, but of European regulation reaching into your online activity.
Well, again, this is a critically important issue, and you've done some incredible work, I know, with Alliance Defending Freedom. And I know, Mr. Price, you've defended witnesses criminally charged for praying near abortion clinics. One of those examples was Father Sean Goff, a Catholic priest who was charged for praying and holding a sign that read, "Praying for Free Speech." UK authorities allege that silent prayer near abortion clinics constitutes an attempt to coerce women who are considering abortions. And I just ask, is silent prayer coercive?
No, sir.
And should silent prayer and holding signs result in legal consequences?
Absolutely not.
So when pro-life activists are prosecuted for engaging in peaceful prayer and protest, what kind of message does that send to other pro-life activists in the UK?
I think it shows an extreme degree of intolerance. It shows police overreach, and ultimately, we have to go back systemically. The problem is these laws that are being created. They're incredibly vague, overbroad, whether it's by European regulators or UK regulators, and they're having a real impact on people's lives and their human right to free speech.
Well, as this committee has discussed previously, the FACE Act here in the United States has been used to go after pro-lifers, and I just pray we don't reach the point that such activists are arrested for silent prayer, as we've seen there. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The committee will stand in recess for 15 minutes, more or less. Restrooms and refreshments in the back for you guys. Thank you so much.
I have always known there's certain things you think about opinion.
Committee will come to order. We have a few more. Again, I want to thank our witnesses. You've been very patient, very good. We appreciate you being here. We're going to start with the gentleman from Wisconsin, then we'll go to the gentleman from North Carolina, unless a member of the minority party shows up, then we'll go with them, and we'll finish up from there. So the gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 5 minutes.
It's my opinion. First of all, I had a few comments I wanted to have for Mr. Brang, do we call it, before he left. And I have always known there's certain things you think about the English. I know we can't stereotype today, but when you think of the English, you think of irreverence, you think of accepting of eccentricities, right? You think of their dry sense of humor. There is no, if we had to crack down on free speech in any country in the world, the country we would lose the most in is if we crack down on free speech in England, because they are great, aren't they? So there's just a general comment. Now, Mr. Price, there are a variety of things we're trying to get at in this hearing, and some of it is financial and how regulations can hurt companies. But I think the most important thing is to wake up the world in what's going on in Britain, okay, and other countries in Europe. I don't think the average American is aware of that. And it's important they be aware of it because I think in general, stupid idiot ideas begin in Europe, and then they go to California, New York, and then they seep their way across the United States. And this idea that we can crack down on free speech, I would like you, Mr. Price, just to go through a few examples, including the examples of that poor gal who wound up in prison. Don't be afraid to not be able to say what she said, because we're still in America, it's still a free country. What do you say to wind up having to go to prison for in Britain today? Exactly what do you have to say? Well, you're still in the U.S.
Yes, sir. I am going back to the UK, though, and after what happened to my fellow Irishman, Graham Lenihan, I might just be careful. One thing I would say is that the overbroad laws that we've been discussing and the implementation or the enforcement of the law has reached a point where we now have perfectly legitimate speech being caught up in criminal prosecutions. So for a Christian pastor like Dia Moodley in the city of Bristol, it's a perfectly natural thing to answer a question from a member of the public about the differences between Christianity and Islam. And the fact that he was ultimately arrested under the Public Order Act there for stirring up religious hatred, which a charge they later dropped, and not the people who were assaulting him, gives us an idea of how bad things have gotten in the UK. And we were delighted, of course, that Vice President Vance, in his Munich Security Conference speech, drew attention to this other class of cases involving prosecutions for praying silently or for holding a sign offering consensual conversations in the vicinity of abortion clinics, which is an extraordinary assault on freedom of speech and, I would say, freedom of religion as well.
Okay, when I was looking this up, I didn't know what she said. Apparently, she was critical of a mass murder whose ancestors came from Rwanda. It's now against the law to point that out in Great Britain, apparently.
Yes, that's the case of Lucy Connolly. Lucy Connolly tweeted a tweet where some of us, or I think most people would probably disagree with what she said. She disagreed with it herself. She took it down 3.5 hours later. It was, as Mr. Farage said, in a moment of great tension and great personal stress. And for that, she received a 32-month sentence. She has been released since, but she was prevented from attending this hearing, which I think is a real shame.
Last week in the United States, we had a horrible murder, and I think it was a Catholic school in Minnesota. The murderer happened to be a transgender. Would that be illegal to point out in England?
If you were, you could very readily see that it could be regarded strong criticism.
He was a very
community.
bitter, angry person.
Yes.
Could we point out that, maybe that had something to do with transgender? Could people have that opinion in Britain?
If I were advising people, and this is the chilling effect in action, I would say think very carefully before posting criticism of what happened, that tragedy in the school in England, because you could be accused very easily of stirring up hatred against a group of people.
Stirring up hatred. I mean, that's just preposterous. What is hatred? I don't even know what hatred is.
This is an ongoing discussion among lawyers in relation to
Is there any,
this defense.
just so you know, in your understanding, Mr. Reed, is there any, doesn't free speech means I can say things that maybe imply I hate somebody? Can I hate somebody? Is that against the law? No.
Really, I think that's a question that Mr. Price is probably better to handle.
Controversial. Maybe I can't. Well, thank God I'm the type of person who's never hated anybody in my life. But if I was a different sort of person, would it be against the law to say I hate somebody?
Well, the difficulty with it is that we've seen again and again legitimate Christian beliefs being described as hatred when it comes to the definition of marriage, when it comes to sexual relations.
Would it be the easiest thing is to enforce the First Amendment and say we can say whatever we want to say? Go back to Old English?
What I would say is you're well blessed in this country to have the extraordinary protections of the First Amendment, and I really do wish we had something similar in Europe.
Well, next time you get back to Europe, straighten him out, kick him in the butt. Okay, thanks.
Yes, sir.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas, who was joined us for part of our visit to the to Europe. We appreciate that. Recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, I hate that I didn't get to reminisce with our good friend, Mr. Farage. But nevertheless, it's interesting that we're sitting here and we're talking about the so-called threats to the First Amendment when the biggest threat to free speech right now is the old guy that is sitting over in the Oval. Now, Mr. Farage and I met over a month ago, and he has made it a brand of being this free speech warrior. And one of the things that I wanted to recap was the fact that he literally tried to shut down my ranking member as he was engaging in his own free speech. It seems like it's more so free speech for me, but not for thee, a lot of times with certain people. And it's sad that he had to run and have lunch with Trump or to go raise some money for his 4-member party. So, Mr. Price, you get to be the lucky one to help me figure out what exactly free speech advocates believe. It's good to see you again. You tell me whether these government actions support free speech or suppress it. Let's call it free speech or federal suppression. Fining or defunding news outlets or companies because they don't share a particular political message.
I think I'm not entirely sure what context you're referring to. I think I'd need a little bit more information.
So, long story short, if they decide that they are going to fine or defund any news outlet simply because it doesn't necessarily go far left or far right, do you think that that is a violation of free speech?
Well, I'm not entirely sure how it would connect with, let's say, the area of expertise that I have. I think you may be referring to the PBS controversy. It's probably not something that I would be able to really...
Not necessarily, but let me go to Professor K. Professor K, did you understand my question? Fining or defunding news outlets or companies because they don't share a particular political message?
Yeah, thank you for the question. At the very core of the First Amendment is a prohibition of viewpoint discrimination.
Okay.
And what you described sounds like viewpoint discrimination.
So it definitely sounds like federal suppression. If you require news outlets and companies to have content moderators to ensure their coverage promotes a political ideology or leaning, would that be federal suppression?
Well, that does sound like an interference with a company's content moderation decision.
Banning materials because of their content.
Materials?
Yes, so like books.
Oh, of course. Well, and we've seen this in the range of book bans at libraries across the country.
Absolutely. What about threatening private companies with lawsuits or fines unless they do the government's bidding?
Sounds like pressure that would be undue, yes.
Okay, so I agree with you. All of these actions are exactly what Trump has done since he's taken office. Make no mistake, Trump is weaponizing his idea of free speech to force folks and companies to become his political puppets to promote his propaganda. Trump and Republicans defunded NPR because they argued it was biased. Trump has removed books discussing racial discrimination at U.S. military academies, including the amazing Maya Angelou's autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. He's tried to strip funding to schools across the country if they don't remove materials that include discussions of racial discrimination or that promote diversity. And in order for the merger between Paramount and Skydance to happen, the FCC chairman and Republican-appointed commissioners required Skydance to establish a bias monitor. And in its FCC order noted reports, quote, concerning negative media coverage of the Trump administration. This is to say nothing of Trump pushing television networks to get rid of comedians and talk show hosts who criticize his administration, say like Mr. Colbert. Let's call this what it is. It's Trump weaponizing the idea of free speech to force people, institutions, and companies to be his mouthpieces. This ain't free speech, it's propaganda. Meanwhile, my Republican colleagues are out here having a meltdown over the European bill, one that, by the way, includes provisions to fight child trafficking. You know, it's frustrating because we talk about being fiscally responsible and we talk about free speech. And right now, as we're having these discussions, you know who's trying to shut down members from voting in the way that they want to vote? It's the president, who literally said he would look at anyone who decided that they were going to vote to release the Epstein files as hostile. That sounds like a threat as it relates to all First Amendment protections, in addition to the fact that it's literally contravening our constitutional duty that we swore an oath to, because we don't swear to an orange king. Instead, we have sworn an oath to the Constitution, and we were elected to represent the people that elected us. Thank you so much, and I'll yield.
Gentlelady yields. Gentleman from North Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the witnesses, thank you all for being here. This is a very important topic when we look at what's going on in Europe, and because of what's going on in Europe, what's happening by extension around the world. When we look at the encroachments on freedom of expression, freedom of speech, it is chilling. And it's remarkable that the countries that gave birth to the Western civilization that we all enjoy are really becoming totalitarian. And even points of expression that are organic to the United States or statements made while in the United States can result in being arrested once you return to Europe. If this was noted 15 to 20 years ago, people would not believe it. And listening to the witnesses here who are on the ground, who are dealing with these totalitarian measures in Europe, it's worth noting to anyone who listens that they are thanking the President of the United States. They are begging the President, they're begging the Vice President and the Secretary of State to continue doing what they're doing, fighting this repression that's going on in Europe. And we've heard testimony that economic liberty is diminishing, freedom of opinion is diminishing, freedom of expression is gone, increased scrutiny of online comments, Twitter, Facebook, or X, it's gone. All under the mantra of safety. And Mr. Price, I want to talk to you first. You said that these points of legislation are really aimed at, quote, protecting youth. How exactly are the proponents of these restrictive measures, how are they making the argument that they're protecting youth?
Yes, that's the argument they make, sir. Essentially, particularly if we look at the Online Safety Act, it's the premise is that safety requires various kind of restrictions, such as age verification. And what that does in effect is that it means that minors aren't allowed to access certain content. But there's two types of content. One is what they call primary priority content, which is the worst kind of things that we would all agree is wrongful. But then there's also priority or primary content, which would include things that I think are otherwise lawful that people should be allowed to access, particularly in the United Kingdom, where the proposal now is to give, I think it's being passed, or it's in the process, 16-year-olds the vote, who would then be prevented from seeing certain content under the Online Safety Act.
And in terms of some of the examples you've mentioned that give me concern, it doesn't seem as though there's too much restriction for modern gender theory, transgenderism, aimed at children, or graphic or explicit material aimed at children. But there are restrictions on pointing out verses of Scripture or biblical truths that people adhere to. You can't discuss that online. How does that factor into the protection of the child?
I think your point is well made. It's worth noting, and it often strikes me, that smartphones with internet access have been available really. The iPhone was launched in 2008, and there were no immediate actions by governments or regulators to try and protect children from content. It's only after the election of Donald Trump and Brexit that there was suddenly an enormous effort at the European level to crack down on content in the name of safety. But I suspect, as I say, that there's an underlying political justification.
So what's the goal? I mean, we've talked about the diminishing prosperity. The freedom is gone. There's diminished enjoyment of life. There's diminished humor. There's zero free-flowing information. What's the goal besides complete political power?
Certainly think the goal, as you allude to, is narrative control. Information is the first and most important, as it were, quantity in a democracy. That's how we make our decisions, based on what we hear. And if you can restrict the amount of information that people hear, or you can channel it in one direction, then you influence the democracy. And as I say, there's increasing discontent in Europe about the direction of travel in so many areas. And I do believe the DSA, like the German Network Enforcement Act and other related legislation, is part of a serious effort to control the narrative.
And it's basically a tool of quote, quote, progressivism to silence dissent and to move the agenda forward. Is that correct? That's what I'm gleaning from the conversation today.
Certainly in a lot of our work, it has gone that way. It seems that Christians are disproportionately targeted. There was a dissenting opinion by the Polish judge in a case called Dotra Rasabaka before the European Court of Human Rights in 2022, where he made the observation that when it comes to speech, those who are critics of Islam seem to be prosecuted and do not have the protections of the right to freedom of expression, whereas Christians, people who are critical of Christianity, are prosecuted and they suddenly are entitled to free speech in that context. So in the UK, we often call this two-tier policing, and I think there's a two-tier approach to human rights. Certainly the Polish judge did, and I agree with him.
Interesting. Mr. Kay, just briefly, in regards to the points that you've made, I appreciate what you've said. I appreciate your perspectives. Would you admit at this point that the Biden administration was involved in suppressing information as it related to various components of the COVID response, the COVID treatment plans, the vaccines, efficacy, and so forth?
I mean, no, that is just not something I know.
You wouldn't stipulate to that? No. Even in, and I know you criticize Mr. Zuckerberg for saying that the government leaned heavily on social media companies to remove content as it related to COVID. So you do not think that the government was engaged in suppressing information in any way?
Well, we know there was, because there's Supreme Court, cases around this, where the allegation was that officials in both administrations, the Trump and Biden administrations, did put some pressure on the companies in terms of public health messaging. There's no question about that. I think the court found that that didn't constitute unlawful pressure or coercion, but clearly those kinds of messages were part of the period of 2020, 2021.
Do you affirm that action by regulating content or no?
Do
you affirm the motivations or the actions of the Biden administration to suppress the COVID discussions?
No, I think there needs to be clear back and forth and information sharing between government and the largest platforms that shape the information environment. Of course, you don't want coercion, but I think you have to find the balance where that kind of back and forth can exist.
Well, I'm sure you're aware that they say they were coerced by the Biden administration.
I think
it appears to be a partisan interpretation when you say that it was reasonable what Biden did with Facebook, with X, and so forth.
Well, I mean, we could go back and forth, but my view is that wasn't coercion, actually.
If you could type on Facebook, "These vaccines do not work," would that have been allowed?
I think
no, it would be
honestly,
stripped.
I think it would depend on when we're talking about.
Under Biden, it would have been stripped. I'm sorry, our time's up, but
yeah.
Anyway,
Mr. Chairman, may I add just one very brief point?
Of course.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to make one point about hate speech, because there's been a lot of discussion about hate speech here, and I think it's valuable for us to at least understand the basis for where these hate speech laws come from. Most of the language from the international law on hate speech, particularly in Europe, was a result of the use of propaganda to target Jews and others during the Nazi Holocaust. So quite a bit of the hate speech is actually a response to that history. And I think at least acknowledging that that is a part of the cultural freedom of expression background in Europe is useful, so that it's not just a kind of bullying of Europeans, but also an understanding of where they come from.
Yeah, but Mr. Price made the point, I think his last comments made the point about a two-tiered system, which they see versus how certain Christians get treated versus how people of a different faith get treated. And if you even use that term, two-tiered system, you can be criticized for using the term about something that many people think exists currently in the UK and in the EU. So there's been lots of comments there. I'll give the chairman, the ranking member some time, and I got maybe one last question, one last point I would like to make.
Oh, thanks. This is just for a UC request, Mr. Chairman, because you had mentioned the outreach that you'd gotten from Mark Zuckerberg, and this is an article about that Meta to pay $25 million to settle 2021 Trump lawsuit. The sentence that stuck out to me was the president signaled that the litigation had to be resolved before Zuckerberg could be, quote, brought into the tent, one of the people said. So just want to introduce that.
Without objection?
And one of the things is just the Supreme Court decision, Murthy versus the Missouri, disproving the government's censorship claims.
Okay, without objection. I'll just make one maybe final point, because it's been brought up several times, I believe. Well, I'll ask all of you. Mr. Kay, has President Trump banned any books in the country? Are you aware of any?
I don't know about him specifically, but I do know that, for example,
Price, you know President Trump's banned any books?
From defense libraries, books on Martin Luther King have actually been removed.
Has President Trump banned any books? I mean, my understanding of the way it works is you got a local library board, you got a local school board, and they may say certain books aren't appropriate for kids, which is frankly the argument they use in the EU on the Digital Services Act and in the UK on the Online Safety Act. No president's banning books. They're just saying, local library board are saying, second graders should maybe not see certain things that adults can see.
Mr. Chairman, if I could follow up on that.
Sure.
Just because I've got constituents who are in the service abroad, and there are schools called DODEA schools, Department of Defense schools, and there was an executive order applying to the Department of Defense, and they shut down the school libraries there. These are federal schools, not local schools, federal schools, and they stripped all kinds of books from there, and there have been protests throughout Europe by American families over there saying that they don't want 1984 and Handmaid's Tale to be stripped from the schools. I mentioned that actually in my opening statement. So.
I want to thank each of our witnesses for being here today. Appreciate your patience and appreciate you being here for, 5 hours. Thank you very much. And this concludes today's hearing. We thank our witnesses for appearing before the committee today. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record.
Can I say one more thing, Mr. Chairman, in praise of you?
Okay.
I might have designed it differently, but I want to thank you for organizing a very interesting trip for us and this hearing as well.
Without objection. Thank you. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.